Great pleasure of being on the conducting staff with Joanne and Matt. And I was asked to put together just a few thoughts in line of a pre-concert lecture for you this evening. Let me start by saying you are in for an incredible treat this evening. I have been here most of the week, observing and assisting Maestro Wit, and I can say to you that you are really going to be in for a very special experience this evening. The variety of what he has chosen and the color and the diversity is absolutely magnificent. So I want to give you a few insights into all of the pieces this evening. We're going to go a little bit out of order because just within the last 10 minutes or so of the pre-concert talk, I'm going to invite out our soloist this evening, our principal horn, Jacek Muzyk, and he's going to come out and talk about the concerto. We're going to do that last because he's backstage warming up just a little bit. So we're going to open this evening with the Tchaikovsky Romeo and Juliet overture, and of course we know Tchaikovsky as being one of the great nationalist composers from Russia. This particular work has quite an interesting background. You're going to hear the third version of this wonderful overture. The seeds of this began in 1869. Tchaikovsky was a 28-year-old professor of composition at Moscow Conservatory. And he was a very close friend of the Russian nationalist composer Mily Balakirev. Now, Balakirev was a very conservative Russian composer from the old nationalist school. Balakirev was not formally trained and really didn't trust people who came out from conservatories who were trained. So Tchaikovsky was like a student of his. He saw Balakirev as a mentor. And so Tchaikovsky wrote this overture entitled Fatum, F-A-T-U-M, which means fate. And he presented it to Balakirev, and he did not expect that Balakirev was going to basically tear the piece apart. And Tchaikovsky was an individual who was basically fairly insecure as a person and insecure as a musician, always needed positive reinforcement, needed people to say, oh, that was just a wonderful job. Well, on this particular piece, Balakirev did not give him any positive feedback, and as a result, Tchaikovsky destroyed the score, got rid of it. But Balakirev suggested to Tchaikovsky, why don't you do something with Romeo and Juliet? You love Shakespeare, and Tchaikovsky did. You love Shakespeare, why don't you do something with Romeo and Juliet? And so he suggested that he take this particular story and set that to music. Okay, so version number 1 comes in 1870. Again, Tchaikovsky dedicates this to Balakirev. Again, which may or may not have been a good thing, but the premiere was March 16th in 1870. But the conductor, a gentleman by the name of Nikolai Rubinstein, had just been caught in a scandal having an affair with a female student. And the press, all they wanted to do was interview this conductor. They paid no attention to Tchaikovsky's new piece. And nobody provided Tchaikovsky with any background or positive feedback. Tchaikovsky was again demoralized. So Balakirev said, you know what, you need to reposition the friar, you need to reposition the love theme, you need to reposition parts of the story. So a second version Tchaikovsky goes into, and this comes out in February of 1872. It is still criticized by Balakirev, and now this previous conductor I mentioned, Rubinstein. Neither of them are positive about the piece. So wisely, Tchaikovsky sets it aside and doesn't revisit this piece until 1880. And he rewrote the ending of it. He added the title Overture Fantasy, which you will see in the program. And it is this version completed September 10th of 1880. And it's this version that you're going to hear tonight. Now, even though it was completed in 1880, it was not premiered. We didn't hear it until May 1st, 1886. So this particular piece, orchestras have to be very sure, because the other two previous editions are published. Orchestras always have to be sure they get the right music, or else they'll be performing the wrong edition and not the best one, which is the one you're going to hear tonight. So we have a first theme that you're going to hear at the very beginning. It's very much like an organ sound. It's very much a chorale sound with the instruments, and that's basically the Friar Lawrence theme. And it's very parallel to what you might hear as a Russian Orthodox hymn. And this, again, is going to come back towards the middle part of the overture. Then we've got the second theme, which is very agitated, and it's the warring of the Capulets and the Montagues. And then thirdly, which of course is the most famous and has been in more motion pictures than any of you and I have, and that is the love theme, the beautiful, beautiful love theme. And of course, this symbolizes the couple's first meeting, and it symbolizes that very romantic balcony scene. Again, it's one of the greatest of the Tchaikovsky works, one of certainly the world's most favorite, and you're going to hear a breathtaking performance of this tonight with the orchestra and Maestro Wit. I can guarantee it. Now, the second piece on the program is going to be the Mozart Concerto, which again we're going to come back to. And so we have our intermission, and so the first piece in the second half of the program is a very, very fascinating piece of music. It's only for strings, and so you will not see any of the other orchestra players. There will be no woodwinds, brass, percussion, nobody else on stage, except all of the string colleagues for this particular piece. The title of the piece is called Orawa, and it's by a contemporary, alive and living well, Polish composer, Wojciech Kilar. Kilar was born in 1932 in Loft, Poland, and he came from a very, very, very well-educated, very affluent, culturally very significant and knowledgeable family. So this was a help. His father was a medical doctor, and his mother was a theater actress. Spent most of his life in the southern region of Poland, the region that we know as Krakowice. He went to what was known as the State Higher School of Music in Krakowice, and then he went to the Higher School of Music in Krakow, Poland. So very, very good training, and then was awarded a scholarship to study with the great, great French composition teacher Nadia Boulanger, and he spent 2 years in France with Nadia Boulanger. Maestro Kilar's legacy is quite interesting because his first fame and fortune came in the 1960s, and he was a member of what we know as the avant-garde school of Polish composers. The avant-garde, many of you are familiar with that term and the style, where the sound, the music itself is basically based on sounds, not necessarily on pitches. And so this was a part of his livelihood for quite a long time. And he was a very close colleague of two other contemporary Polish composers in that avant-garde school, Górecki and Penderecki. Penderecki is a fairly well-known name. And he also chaired the Association of Polish Composers for a number of years. And this association gave young Polish composers an opportunity to have their music performed. It was a great outlet for them and a support for young composers. But in the 1970s, Kilar abandoned that avant-garde approach, that style, those techniques. And he won acclaim in two areas. First, in films. He went into the film music industry and became very, very successful. The scores of his films won international acclaim and success. Now, the majority of them were never really premiered or shown in our country. But he won great recognition for Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, and that's from 1992. We've got Roman Polanski's Ninth Gate from 1991, and The Pianist. Many of you I know have seen The Pianist from 2002, and Jane Campion's Portrait of a Lady, and this is from 1996. So those are a couple films that probably are familiar to some of you that did at least get to this country, and Kilar was the composer for some of that music. The second of his claims to fame in the 1970s was a change from the avant-garde category of music to what we know as the minimalist school, and that is the Orawa piece you're going to hear this evening. Minimalist style is a term in music that is parallel to the style of minimalism in art. And in music, we define minimalism as being a composer who uses the fewest amount of resources for the greatest amount of mileage. So in this particular piece, you're going to hear very, very small segments of the same repeated notes over and over and over. Very, very few varieties of notes, but with great, great diversity and great, great interest in what he does with the strings. The Orawa, the term Orawa, is a name that Kilar put on as the result of a mountain region in the Carpathian area of Eastern Europe. And this is basically his tribute to this beautiful, beautiful area of Poland that he thought so highly of. The beauty of it is something that he really wanted to capture in music. This piece is a technical workout for the strings. You are going to see my colleagues on this stage literally working out. They are going to be sweating a lot by the time this piece ends. It is a very physical piece of music and very demanding from the standpoint of the bowing that you're going to see back and forth, the rhythms that are in this. But again, keep in mind that this is what we define as a minimalist piece of music, and I think you'll be very, very intrigued as to how much mileage he gets out of this approximately 9-minute piece, how much mileage he gets out of what starts as just a very few amount of notes at the beginning of this piece. The orchestra is divided into sections. We've got first, second violins, violas, cellos, and basses, as we always do. But there are solos that are given to individual players in each of those sections. So you might hear just 4 first violins over here. You might hear just 3 violas in the center, maybe just 2 cellos over here. So there's a lot of importance, solo importance, that's placed on various members of each of these sections. So as you watch and listen to this piece, again, I know you'll be impressed with the physical energy that you're going to see, but also what he can do with basically small kernels of musical ideas. And don't miss the very last sound. I'm not going to tell you, but don't miss the very last sound that you hear coming from the orchestra, because it's quite unique and it's quite refreshing, and I know that you will enjoy that. So that's Orawa. Then the rest of our colleagues are going to come back on stage to finish the concert with the Shostakovich First Symphony. We have not done this piece with the orchestra since around 1959. This is an amazing symphony, and if nothing else, what I want you to keep in mind as you are listening to this 31-minute piece is that this was written by a 19-year-old youth. 19 years old. Shostakovich began work on this around 1924 and 25. In that year period, he was 19 years old, and this symphony was written as a graduation piece from the Leningrad Conservatory. It was first performed in May of 1926 by the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra. The American premiere of this piece was with the Philadelphia Orchestra, Leopold Stokowski, in October of 1828. Now, It's important to remember that Shostakovich comes from a fairly traditional conservatory background. So he is following the patterns that have been established over the years in symphonic music. So this has a standard 4-movement pattern to it, standard 4 movements. But there's a couple things I want you to particularly listen for in each of these movements. There's lots of things, so I have to narrow this down. But the first movement, the first and second movements are really very, very witty. They're very playful. They're very entertaining. In the second movement, you're going to hear the piano, which is not a common instrument in the symphony orchestra in symphonic literature, but you're going to hear the piano as a very important part of the sound. Shostakovich himself was a brilliant pianist. So you're going to hear the piano, and the second movement, so that you're not fooled, has a false ending. There's this massive, massive wall of sound, and it comes to a crashing end. Don't applaud. Okay? Because after that, you're going to hear the piano bang out some chords, and then there's about another 2 minutes that comes after that. But those 2 movements are fairly entertaining. And you may hear things that sound a little bit like some Stravinsky or maybe Eulenspiegel, Strauss. It's very entertaining. However, the next 2 movements are not. The next 2 movements are not. In the third movement, you're going to hear some beautiful, beautiful solo work. Pierre Roy, our principal oboe, has a lengthy solo at the very beginning of this movement. Roman Mikhailov has a cello solo that's lengthy. Michael Ludwig, a violin solo. And Alex Jacopi, a trumpet solo. These are fairly lengthy, and they're interspersed through the movements. Third movement has a great deal of passion to it. The third movement almost sounds like movie music. There are segments in here that really kind of sweep you and just pick you up because it's just very lush, lush writing. But also unusual is that the third movement is connected to the fourth movement. And you're going to hear the snare drum roll off to your right over here. And you're going to hear the snare drum roll, and it's going to get louder and louder and louder. And then that immediately takes us into the fourth movement. The fourth movement is literally frantic. The strings are constantly doing this tremolo. It's a very nervous movement, to be very honest with you, okay? Shostakovich, in my opinion, is sensing the horrors that are on the doorstep of Russia, the horrors that are coming into Russia with the rules of Lenin and Stalin. And he is anticipating these horrors. There is another false ending. As an educated consumer, I know you want to know. Don't applaud. Okay? There's another false ending, followed by a very unique timpani solo. Very, very unique timpani solo. But the symphony does end with a blaze of glory and victory. It's a very, very exciting piece of music, and it's absolutely wonderful that we are finally doing it after such a long time. This was a tremendous success at the premiere, and to this day, this symphony is still considered to be one of Shostakovich's best, and it's very, very much a contrast to the massive, large symphonies that are coming up later. Shostakovich wrote 15 symphonies. And once you get past symphony number 6, 7, 8, we're talking some massive, massive orchestral works. This one is not in that care. It's almost like a chamber symphony because you're going to hear small instruments that are going to be featured in many ways. Shostakovich loved Stravinsky. But because he was in a traditional conservatory, the conservatory really didn't allow him much exposure to what was happening into the 20th century world. So this symphony is going to represent, and you're going to hear some reflections of the Petrushka, which is very much a playful orchestral work. There's a lot of that in here. And it's almost as if Shostakovich is saying in this particular symphony, he's paying a tribute to the humans who are now becoming marionettes, who are becoming puppets of this oppressive government that he is trying to live under. And finally, at the very end of the symphony, the humans are also free from their bounds and free from this type of governmental repression, which of course does not happen until at least 1953. And again, please keep in mind that this work was written by a 19-year-old student. It's an amazing experience to hear this work. I want to finish up and ask you to welcome to the stage one of my very esteemed colleagues and one of the great virtuoso players that we have in this orchestra, and who's going to come out. We're going to talk just a little bit about the Mozart Horn Concerto. Please welcome Jacek Muzyk. There you are, man. Okay, come. Jacek and I talked a couple times as to what we wanted to cover, and it's he's one of these guys that I could talk to for hours, and we have about 10 minutes left. But we.
He speaks, I listen, of course.
Okay. Well, we're going to change that in a second. Jacek is going to be playing the fourth Mozart Horn Concerto. Mozart wrote 4 of them within a time span of approximately 1784 to 1791. And all 4 of these concerti were written for a virtuoso horn player in the Vienna region. His name was Ignaz Leitgeb, and he became a friend of Mozart's. And so Mozart wrote these pieces for him. Now, he also used a little bit of humor in each of these concertos. For example, first concerto, whereas we very often have tempo markings that tell us how fast or how slow to play the speed of the piece, Mozart wrote in the first concerto, coraggio, or courage. And then in the fourth one that Jacek is going to be playing, when he handed the manuscript over to Ignaz, it was all in different colors. The ink, he used multicolors in the ink, which totally threw off Ignaz. He didn't know what to make of red notes. So Mozart, again, kept these 4 concerti in such great spirit, and they are absolutely dazzling pieces of music. But we're going to talk to you for just a second about this instrument, because this instrument is really quite amazing. And while I'm a little bit partial to it myself, it is by far one of the most difficult instruments to play. The brass instruments, and all again in one big family, the sound of which is produced by this mouthpiece. And each brass instrument has a different size of mouthpiece, obviously to correspond with the instrument. But the sound of a brass instrument is made when the lips go to the front of this mouthpiece, and then the lips literally buzz. Let's do that. Okay. So that vibration now, the lips and the center of the lips, placing that into the horn, then makes a much better sound, obviously. But when Ignaz played these pieces, there were no valves on these horns. This was what was called an open horn or natural horn in Mozart's time. And Jacek has valves on here, and the valves control the airflow that goes through all of the tubing that you see here. And I think we said the length of the horn was about 19?
Yeah, 17 to 19.
17 to 19 feet if we emptied this all the way out.
But please do not ask me to prove it right now, because I need to play tonight.
We need the instrument tonight, okay. But between 17 to 19 feet if it was all extended. And so the natural horn had no valves on, and obtaining the pitches was totally by the pressure on the lips. The less pressure, the lower the notes. The more pressure, the higher the notes. Why don't we do, I'll take this. Why don't we do the open, we'll just some open horn. No valves now. And what makes the horn so difficult is that it's really possible to play many different notes with the same fingering. And if you're not very careful with the pressure that's on the embouchure in your lips, you can play the wrong note. So that's what makes this instrument much more difficult as opposed to most of the other orchestral instruments. Okay, let's
Yeah, I'll give you an example, like Mozart Concerto No. 1, how we play these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And 200 years ago, of course, I try.
Let's turn. Let's turn this way. You need to also see Jacek's right hand, because the right hand is also controlling the airflow and the pitch as it comes out of the instrument. That is very tough. Now, concerto is, again, most all of you know, a concerto is defined as an instrumental work for solo instrument and orchestra. Sometimes we say solo instrument versus the orchestra. However, also part of a concerto responsibility in most cases is what we know as a cadenza. The cadenza is the show-off part. The cadenza is where the soloist goes off by themselves, unaccompanied, no orchestra underneath, and because there is no accompaniment, the soloist then is allowed to express themselves a lot more freely, with a lot more liberty, because there's no accompaniment that they have to deal with. The cadenza in the first movement, I should give this back to you.
Yeah,
The first movement. What is the origin of that cadenza? Because you're going to hear one in the first movement, Jacek's going to do.
And there is also a little cadenza in
Small
the third
one
movement.
in the third
Yes.
movement, right. Is that a cadenza that was in the publisher that you used, or
No,
did you write this?
It's my own cadenza.
Okay.
I would say my own little composition, but it's of course only 2-3 minute piece.
But the cadenza was the responsibility of the performer. In most cases, the composer did not write out the cadenza, and it was expected at that time that the soloist could improvise. And so the cadenzas were made up. So if you have a Mozart or if you have a Beethoven who were very gifted at improvising, that's exactly what they did. Nowadays, there are publishers who will provide a cadenza if the soloist is not as versatile as Jacek is here to write their own. So the two that you're going to hear are your cadenzas?
Yeah, both are mine.
Wonderful, wonderful. We are getting close to our time limit, so the musicians can come on stage, but we have an announcement to make about a CD.
Yes. Since you're so good with talking, just do that. Okay, this is so new. You are the first ones to know. Yeah, this is the newest CD. I actually physically got it yesterday.
Yesterday.
And I would like to recommend it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
I'm using plenty. I mean, the idea of the CD is every piece with a different instrument. So it's called Horn Constellation. So it's horn and piano and soprano, and flute and harp, and two
Each one
horns.
different.
So since there are a few musicians from the Philharmonic, I would strongly recommend to look at it.
This is brand new. I am absolutely delighted that we can show this to you. And so we've asked Jacek to be out in the lobby at the intermission and at the end of the concert, so you can get the premier copies of this new CD. You are going to hear some of the most elegant, some of the most velvet horn playing any place in the world tonight. And it's going to be this gentleman who's going to razzle-dazzle you. Thank you, everybody. It's great to see you here. Thank you. Okay, my friend?